guys, welcome back to another episode of Kim TV. Today, as you can clearly see, I'm joined by my amazing husband, Chris Michael Harris, and we're going to touch on burnout, getting unstuck, and kind of going through all the motions of business and entrepreneurship and our personal lives and dive deep into that specific topic. But before we dive in, I wanted to introduce Chris for those of you who have not had a chance to check out maybe his podcast, or maybe you're not part of the Business Lounge, you haven't been part of our Q&As. Chris is an amazing entrepreneur. He grew his first startup all the way to multiple seven figures in about 36 months. He's also an incredible podcast host. His podcast is called Entrepreneur Hour. You should definitely check out if you haven't already, where he interviews some of the most amazing, prominent, incredibly successful entrepreneurs like Damon John, Barbara Corcoran, basically all the sharks. And you've had amazing people in the online space as well, like Marie Forleo, and the list goes on and on and on and on. I could sit here and talk about a billion of your podcast guests, and we would be here for a while.
Sometimes
but anyway.
I feel sometimes they should be the host because I'm just along for the ride.
Anyhow, so I just wanted to bring him on here today because this topic of burnout has been something that we've been chatting a lot about, both in our communities as well as kind of we've gone through it ourselves, you specifically.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of dive in deep into that and unpack that whole idea. So first and foremost, Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your story and kind of explain what being unstuck and burnt out looks like in today's world for an online entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, I can get to my story and then I can talk a little bit more about how it's affecting the ecosystem that is entrepreneurs. So as you mentioned, I grew my first startup mid-20s, 24, 25, and we were fortunate and blessed enough to grow that business to multiple seven figures in a very short period of time, completely bootstrapped, which was an amazing experience. And honestly, you and I talk about it, but I wouldn't be able to have the platform that I have with the podcast or with any of my messaging, whether it's now the YouTube channel, which we just started, which has been really exciting, and I'm enjoying that medium now as well.
Yes, definitely go subscribe. He just launched it. It's a really good channel. It's going to be down in the description box below. Yeah,
it's really cool. We have some audio aspects that we also now do video, so all of the interviews are now video as well. And then I do, videos like this where it's just giving advice and stuff like that. Yeah. So been really cool. But anyways, throughout that journey of building that company, from the outside looking in, it was like really exciting and things are growing, and that was the case. Yeah. But people don't understand what's required, right? Growth requires way more than what we think it does, both in cash, time, energy, resources, etc., right? And if you're growing as quickly as we were, like experiencing 1,000% growth from year to year, which was madness, what you often find is that you can quickly end up in burnout, right? And so as of May of 2019, whenever you're listening to this, the World Health Organization has now recognized burnout as a legitimate medical condition. It's not just a millennial snowflake thing anymore, like so many people dubbed it to be. Yeah. It is a real medical condition, and effectively what it is chronic stress over long periods of time and the effect thereof that it has on the body itself, right? So what we now have an understanding of is what that does to your endocrine system, so both your thyroid and your adrenals. Now, another aspect, which was exacerbated greatly in my situation, was that I had an underlying chronic health ailment that I wasn't aware of and went misdiagnosed for 20 years, which was severe intestinal dysbiosis, which in often cases is a precursor to Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, potentially even colon cancer. So when I went and we're in the middle of our Series A, and for those that don't know what that is just more of an institutional round of funding, right? So seeking out investors and doing those things, right? So we had several commitment letters, and we were ready to rock and roll. We had really aggressive pro formas. Like we were looking to turn that into a $30 million, $50 million and beyond company, potentially exit, go IPO, all those really exciting things that all entrepreneurs, a lot of entrepreneurs, not all, dream about doing. And I'm just feeling terrible, as you know, right? I'm explaining this story to you, but you were there.
First time I've heard it.
For the audience, I'm explaining it to Kim, but really I'm explaining it for you. But Kim's like, there's something wrong with you, dude. Yeah. Like, this is not normal. And I just, like, there just wasn't even fuel left in the tank. Like I was just tapped out completely. There was nothing to tap into anymore. Like that's how far I had pushed myself.
And do you feel like that was a slow progression, or did you just all of a sudden wake up and like just feel exhausted, depleted, all the things that we associate with like being stuck and burnout and all that good stuff?
It's a slow progression.
Okay.
But there comes a point in time that we all reach that point of inflection where we recognize this isn't working. I don't feel good, and there's a lot of different subtleties that we can tap into, and that's the scary part, because by the time that you have where I was, which as I was getting into the story went to the doctor, got lab results, and the doctor's like, dude, at this pace, man, you're going to be gone by 40 or 50 years old, right? So that's kind of the end of that story. Now, to your point, the terrifying thing is that once you've gotten to the point where your signs and symptoms are that severe, you're way down the road.
Is that what happened for you?
Yes, that's exactly where I was, right? So what we didn't realize was all of the little subtle things that came up along that path.
The red flags.
Right, that now, in retrospect, we can recognize they are what they were, which is huge red flags, like, dude, sound the alarm type status. So what I've tried to do is, sure, I'm going to help people. I help people now with burnout. We have all kind of resources to help people specifically with burnout, because here's the thing, there's resources for entrepreneurship, and then there's resources for burnout. There's not like this point of synergy between meshing those two together, right? So, and oftentimes too, is that you can be burned out in a job, right? Like you can experience like the physical burnout. So there are some differences between what types of burnout you're experiencing. The type that I'm talking about is severe burnout to the point that it's affecting you physically. But there are points of burnout where it hasn't yet majorly impacted your health. It's more of those like mentally, I just need a break and I come back recharged, right? So it's figuring out, and this is the way I try to explain it, but like stuck, overwhelm, burnout, these are all on the same spectrum. It just depends, it's just contingent upon where you are in that spectrum, right? Now, so it's harder to identify if it's less severe, right? So the more severe your circumstance, if you're an obese human being, right, you can see that you're clearly overweight. But those first 5 or 10 pounds, you don't really notice all that much, right? Like you don't see those physical signs as much as you do as when you're severely overweight. So what I've tried to do is now help people identify that, because there are some issues, not just with entering into physical ailment burnout like I did, but also getting you past feeling stuck in your business, right? And getting you moving closer to your goals, right? And that ultimately is what I'm seeing a lot of, is people are just stuck and they don't know what to do about it.
So I love that you brought that point up, and a lot faster than I thought we would kind of dive into. What are some of those key signs and kind of red flags that you might experience as an entrepreneur that you should be paying attention to before you hit burnout? So in my experience, like I think I've hit burnout 3 or 4 times in my career, right? Like every 6-7 months, there's something that happens that lets me know something's wrong, right? And so like, is burnout, in your experience, something that is inevitable? Do we all have to go through burnout? Is it that common where, you know, there's ebbs and flows in entrepreneurship? So like if you're in a sprint, like it's inevitable you're going to burn out, or is there things that we could do to prevent it? And maybe before we get into even all of that, do you think it would be smarter to talk about maybe some signs of burnout and then how to kind of address that?
Yeah, so I can start with the signs first, and then we can kind of get into what you can do about it next. Some of the subtle signs that maybe people don't recognize is, well, let's go with the ones you would recognize first. So if you feel like you're having to really push yourself, right? Like you're not entering your day in being really inspired by what you're doing, right? It kind of feels like, oh, this feels like a job, like I'm not really inspired by this, and like you're kind of like the creativity juices aren't flowing and stuff like that. Maybe you're starting to have a little bit more of a negative perspective about things, whereas, you know, for me, and I know you told this about me, was I was like an unyielding optimist, right? Like everything was like sunny day scenario, and then all of a sudden I just started noticing I was complaining a lot, looking at things negatively, got a little bit cynical, had like an outward negative view about people in general, which again ties into the cynicism thing. So there's a lot of, those are some of the bigger signs. If you keep going down that path, you'll start to see the physical signs, right? So when you start entering into burnout, some of the biggest things, and I have an entire video on this on my YouTube channel where I talk about burnout, how to beat burnout, but more of the physical aspects of it as it relates to burnout. But usually what you see is people start leaning a little bit more. They're not standing up with like a rigid posture. A lot of cravings start to happen because you have a little bit of deficiencies.
Okay.
So the body's producing too much cortisol, and effectively you start having weakened adrenals. And so you start having cravings, salt, sugar, carbs. Those are all really big cravings you might experience. You may have little afternoon lulls between like 2 and 5. You may find that you're really over caffeinating. So you're like, oh my God, the 1 cup of coffee is just not doing it for me anymore, because you've effectively overstimulated your endocrine system. And so you're not now naturally producing that like energy level that so you're kind of going tapping into the well a little bit more than you were before. A lot of people also experience where they wake up and they're absolutely exhausted. Like, and no matter how long they sleep, it's like never enough, right? And then all of a sudden at night, miraculously at 7, 8, 9 o'clock, maybe even as late as 11, they hit this second wind and they can't sleep. So they're up until 2 o'clock in the morning, and then the next morning they're kicking themselves for not going to sleep earlier. But the body and their circadian rhythms get completely thrown out of whack, right? All internally, biologically, you're completely out of whack, right? And so those are some of the more severe signs. Now, if you get as bad as to where I am, as where I still am now, there are real signs, and I could show the audience, like if we had time to do that. Like if I bend over and stretch and I stand back up, I have pigmentation issues all over my face, blood rushes to my head, and you can see white dots on my face because of how weakened my endocrine system has become as a result of that. So, I know for a fact that it's not, just something that I've been fabricating in my mind, which is a big part of it. And I think that's the hard part for a lot of people is this thing is burnout has been so vague for so long, and we've just now recognized that it is a medical condition, right? Yeah. That for so long people didn't think that it was a real thing. But looking at the lab results, like we can see cortisol production, my iodine levels for both my urinalysis and saliva analysis were double zeros, right? So they're just not doing anything, right? So anyways, so let's get into the aspect of what you can do about it, right?
Yeah, but before we do, I actually wanted to talk, because you mentioned a lot of the physiological red flags, right? Like the health aspect of the red flags. But how does those, like, how does not being on your game health-wise and having these small symptoms, how does that affect your business and your overall output? Because I feel like, and I don't know, maybe this is just me, we're conditioned to forego health in the pursuit of wealth. Right? Like your health takes the back burner. That's how it's been for my entire career, except the last maybe year and a half where I started really paying more attention to my health. But for the majority of my career as an online entrepreneur, it was push, go, no matter what, all hours of the day, especially because I could take my laptop wherever, whenever, it'd be Thanksgiving and I would be running a promotion for Black Friday and getting ready for that and, typing away on my computer after dinner. So like, how does burnout or, kind of seeping into that pattern of burnout affect your business and your optimal success level?
So you're going to lose a lot of the perspective that you maybe once had, right?
Yeah.
Like, so a lot of people experience this where they deem something to be like, I don't know what to do. Yeah. Someone else gives them their outside perspective, right? Or says, and they're like, oh my God, how did I not see that? Right? Or so
you start missing things.
You miss things.
Like
you miss
logical,
things.
common things.
You're working on something and you keep telling yourself that there's no solution. I just have to do it myself.
Wow.
Right? Instead of actually finding affordable solutions for what you're trying to do. So again, that ties into some of the lacking the optimism, starting to think more pessimistically.
Yep.
And those type things. So that's where you start to see people, which is why I say stuck and burnout are on the same spectrum. Yeah. It's just the early signs of burnout.
Sure.
But being stuck, that's usually what you see is the lack of creativity, lack of inspiration, lack of motivation, which is a huge thing that there's a lot of things as it relates to this are very paradoxical, right? So a lot of people are like, what can I do to be more motivated about my business? And the unfortunate thing is that motivation doesn't spawn out of nowhere. You create motivation, right? And you create motivation by getting momentum. So being stuck leads to lack of motivation. Staying stuck leads to burnout, right? So in terms of how that relates to your business, what you often find is people enter into that phase and it's a slippery slope because they're pushing themselves. They're not bringing their A game every single day. They're not operating optimally. And then what happens is things just start spiraling out of control, right? Because they start running out of time. So they feel like I have to work 20 hours a day, right? because I have to catch up, because now I feel like I'm
behind.
I'm behind.
Right.
I'm not reaching my goals, right? Which we're going to talk about how goals are paradoxical too. And so now I have to put in more time, more work, more, and I'm running out of time, right? So what do I start doing? Skipping out on healthy meals, skipping out on food, skipping out on exercise, doing the things that are going to level you up, right? And so many people get that the wrong way, which I think is an important point to mention, that most people view health and happiness as a destination, and you need to view it the opposite way, which is I had to learn the hard way, is level up, be more before you can do more, right? Because I assumed that my business would grow and then it would pull me up and level me up.
Yeah.
And it's completely the opposite. And what ends up happening is if your business starts sprinting and you're not ready to sprint, if you're crawling to the finish line because you have literally just exhausted yourself, how in the world do you expect, like, unless you exited the business, which in most cases is not the case, right? You're gonna have to double down even further. The business is running and it's just leaving you behind. And like that's the thing with my first business. My first business didn't fail, right? Like I'm not doing that business anymore. I ran out of gas. I wasn't able to keep going, right? And so goals as it relates to your business, they have to be in line with you leveling up at the same time. There has to be a symbiotic relationship between how you're taking care and investing in yourself as it relates to how you're growing your business.
I love it, and I feel like that's the perfect kind of segue into really understanding how you can prevent it, what you can do about it. If you feel like, maybe you are, at home watching and you're losing that momentum, right? Like you don't feel as motivated. You don't feel like you're actually achieving the milestones that you've set up for yourself. What are some things that you can do right now, right, to get back on track? And I know that you have an amazing quiz that you've just developed.
Yeah, it's pretty
like blown up. I'm so excited, and I wanted to talk about it because I think it's such a powerful tool to determine, are you stuck? What area are you stuck in? And could burnout be the reason? So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but I think kind of shifting gears here into what can we do about it, and really looking at how momentum, motivation, goal setting affects burnout.
Yeah, so the first thing is you need to quantify your efforts, right? Because most people, if I had to ask you, how much time are you spending on social media content creation this week, Kim?
Yeah.
Like when I ask somebody that question, oftentimes they have no idea.
Right.
Because they're just doing stuff, right? And the problem is that if you've come from a 9 to 5, and oftentimes many of us, even if we haven't, throughout our schooling, so much of what we've done has been dictated by someone else telling us what to do.
Yeah.
Now we have this blank canvas, so we don't entirely know how to utilize our time.
Sure.
And we often find ourselves becoming taskmasters. So we just make a list of everything that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And there's no order by which we approach that. It's just whatever I feel like working on today.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yes.
And so what ends up happening is that those things that you're doing, which in the 9 to 5 normal world, right, would mean good grades, promotion, so on and so forth, aren't the things necessarily that move you closer to your business goals.
Boom.
They don't move the needle necessarily. So what you want to focus on are areas that drive what I call the highest levels of contribution.
Okay.
Right? The peak performers, the people that are most successful, I would argue in many cases, and I know because I've interviewed these people and I've asked them this question, I assume that they're juggling all these things at once.
Yeah.
That's not the case. In fact, many of them value, look at Jeff Bezos. He swears by his 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Here's a guy running $1 trillion company. You would think he's just all over the place because here we are running a startup that can barely pay our bills in many cases, right? And many of us have serious financial issues or massive debt while we're starting our business. I can't imagine what Jeff Bezos has to go through. And here he is, just slumbering it up for 9 hours a night, right?
It's so funny you mentioned that because we were just talking about how J-Lo's the same way. Like it's non-negotiable whether she's on set or not, whether she's touring, she's sleeping, and she's a mom of 2. She's running multiple companies. It's crazy.
But these people have a foundational understanding of what I can do is focus on what's going to move things forward for me the most. The highest levels of impact, the highest levels of contribution.
I love it.
Right? And then they protect their time like no one else, right? So throughout what I do throughout my teaching is I help you establish what those things are. Okay. And I've taken you through that exercise when you were kind of like, you were growing.
Absolutely.
Many people experience
oh my
this.
gosh,
and
it
you
was
were
so
working
helpful.
80, 90, 100 hours a week.
Yep.
And I'm like, this is insane.
Like a machine.
You have, and that's the thing, we get stuck into that rut of 100%. Just doing those things, right? Again, using that word stuck. And it's admirable, right? So here's the thing, and I want to make sure everybody knows this. Getting to the point of being stuck, or even getting to the point where it's so severe that you end up in burnout, don't beat yourself up about it, because it takes a very committed and dedicated person and a very ambitious person to get to that point. Because if you were lazy, being stuck and getting burned out, it ain't gonna happen, because you're not applying yourself at all, right? So a lot of people, they kind of like, oh, I'm burned out. Like, I don't want to admit that I'm burned out. Like, it seems like that's really like an attack on who I am. Like I did something wrong. And it's like, no. It was admirable that you did that.
You're doing the work.
You're doing the work. And
you
that's
are showing
totally,
up.
Yes, and that's totally commendable. So that's where it starts. Is first identifying what are all the things that I'm doing and having an objective perspective, because it becomes subjective, especially if you start staying stuck for a while.
Okay.
Because remember what I told you, you stop seeing things for what they are. Someone comes in and points something out to you, and you're like, oh my God, how did I miss that?
Right.
Well, what if the thing is you're missing 30 hours of stuff that actually isn't moving things forward for you, right? Yeah. Then all of a sudden you're working 80 hours and you stop seeing the forest for the trees, right? So it becomes this really vicious cycle.
Totally.
So first it's identifying what are the things that I need to do in my business to get to next X result. And that leads me to my next point. Because goals are paradoxical. So what does that mean? It's not just like a fancy thing that I came up with. It sounds
what the heck
sounds
are
really
paradoxical
clever, right?
goals?
I'm just kind of sliding that in there to sound clever. So let me give you an example. You have this thing that you want to accomplish, right? And let's say it's been 6 months and you haven't accomplished this thing yet, right? The longer that you go not accomplishing this goal that you set out for yourself, the harder it seems and the bigger the goal feels, right? So you create 100%. This artificial distance between yourself. And that's again where somebody comes in and says, dude, you just do bum, 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 and then that's it. And you're like, oh my God, that was so easy. Why did I make this out to be such this big thing? Like, this wasn't hard at all, right? And so the longer you start procrastinating these things, it's like a mountain. It's like, oh my God, it's huge, and I feel so far away, and this and that. So it becomes paradoxical. And in your mind, you start thinking, oh my God, this thing is just, like, I'm never going to be able to climb this thing, right? So Michael Hyatt talks about setting smarter goals, right? So it's specific, it's
measurable.
Let's see, smarter. So M is measurable, actionable, so on and so forth, right? It's an acronym that stands for so many different things, right? And so effectively what you need to do is, now that you know what your priorities are, right? Start setting goals that you have. Make your big goals, turn them into little goals that lead to big wins.
Okay,
right?
So you're saying it's not about being busy.
No.
It's not about doing
minds.
more.
Yes.
It's about getting very laser specific and strategic with what you do take on and doing those things that are going to get you to the next level. So when you're setting goals, they have to be smart goals. They need to be goals that are actually going to move you forward, right? You
need to actually feel like you're moving forward. So I have a thematic process that I utilize every week, and I know you do the same. You deploy that, and it's something we talked about. But for those listening that don't know what we're talking about, every week there's a certain theme that aligns with the goals that we've set for the quarter, for 6 months, for the year. And you splinter those off, and then you break that down into steps that are going to lead you there. So instead of looking at the mountain as a whole, look at, how do I get to this next cliff? Or what does this next step look like, right? Because here's what we talked about. We talked about momentum before, right? We talked about motivation. As you can look back and you've checked all your boxes in line with the goals that you've set for yourself, making them achievable, making them actionable, right? Not this big, like, I want to build a $5 million company.
Right.
Dude, that's going to take years, right? I mean, unless you're just Elon Musk or somebody that's just going to like wake up out of bed, and just blow something up out of the water. Like, for most of us starting out for the first time, those things are going to take a long time. And so we end up feeling stuck, even though, and this is again why it's all perception, and perception becomes a reality. Because if you feel like those goals are far away, you start missing the things you've actually done. So you may not be as stuck as you think you are, but in your mind you're stuck because X big thing, whatever that is, $5 million goal, hasn't happened yet. But if you actually go back down and you're looking at all the things that you've accomplished along the way en route to the $5 million ultimate goal, you're like, wow, we've made a lot of progress, right? But type A's, and usually that aligns with entrepreneurs, it's all about what does the end look like? None of these other things are enough until we achieve the ultimate goal. And that's great because that is what's going to get you to that point. But you need to create the path so you're not just wandering in the woods. And then the other thing is this, making it and kind of reverse engineering with the end in sight allows you to have a clearer path. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a straight line. It never is the case. Okay. You're going to have pivots. You're going to have things that happen. Life's going to happen. For me, health happened, right? So it's going to zigzag, but you're not going to see like squiggly lines and all over the place where you don't know where you are, right? You're going to have a calculated vision of, yep, we've merged a little bit to the right, but I can tell we're still on that right path to the end goal, right? This part of the mountain is, it's not passable. But hey, if we go this way a little bit and then back up, we're getting closer to the top, right? So you're going to have that foresight a little bit more than if you're just doing stuff with no measurable process to actually see if you're moving closer to the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that you touched on something that I want to kind of dive deeper and unpack. So if we are stuck in whatever area of life, right? Or we feel like we are either burnt out or on the verge of burnout. What can we do today? What are some practical strategies to course correct?
Slow down.
Slow down.
The first thing is slow down.
But see, you say slow down, and immediately my reaction is like, I can't slow down. I can't afford to slow down.
Right.
So how do you get over that mental hurdle of, holy crap, like I'm barely hanging on for dear life. Like I'm going all out and I have to make this happen, or like there is no plan B.
No, right.
How do you get over that? Because I know both of us have felt that way in different stages of our career. And when the advice came to us of like, slow down, that was the last thing we were willing to do.
No, sure. No, and I don't mean for long periods of time.
Okay.
Right? But you need to carve out at least an afternoon. Like for me,
that's doable.
For me, it's every Friday.
It's a couple hours.
Now I'm to the point where it's an entire day.
Okay.
But every Friday, I sit down, I do a post-mortem of my week, right? In my full focus planner, which is Michael Hyatt's tool. And I basically am jotting down like, okay, here was my week. Am I closer to where I want to be? What went right? What went wrong? What can I do better? And just really just take that time to myself.
Sure.
My phone's on Do Not Disturb, right? I don't want anybody contacting me. No distractions. When I had, because I had at one point over 750 employees, right? So part-time, right? So at that time they knew I closed my door and whatever happens, happens. Because here's the other thing, and let's say you are at that point where you do have a team. We oftentimes will create these fabrications of reality of, oh my God, the world will crumble if I'm gone for 3 hours.
Right.
And oftentimes what ends up happening is you leave for a few hours and you're like, that wasn't that bad.
Nothing happened.
That wasn't that bad.
It was fine.
Or what you do is you leave and you recognize, and this is where you get really smart as a savvy entrepreneur, when you're really getting to the point where you become more mature and more refined as an entrepreneur, is stepping away makes you realize what you need to shore up so that you can remove yourself from that process so that you can work on your highest levels of contribution. So you need to have an analytical perspective. And pulling yourself out of, as we talked about, not being able to see, I don't know, man, I'm just doing everything. I'm run. Like, dude, get out of the hamster wheel.
Right.
Because oftentimes you're going back and be like, oh my God, what was I doing? But, and I even recommend to go so far as, don't just take a few hours. Get out of the office.
Yes.
Right? Go work from a coffee shop, go to the park, get outside, get out of your normal environment.
Yep.
And it's amazing when I tell clients or students to go do that. They go away and they go for a walk, and they're still like mentally, in their business. They're not like, screw it, you know, like they're still present in what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, so
I have a bunch of things that came to mind.
Right, as did I. But getting out of your environment gives you and helps you reclaim the objectivity that you might have lost along the way.
I love
right?
that.
Allows you to see what's going on, what's going wrong, and just be like, you know what? If the world crumbles right now when I leave, it's nothing that we can't figure out, right? It's nothing that we can't solve. It's nothing we can't fix. But I need to know what's wrong. So you need to start playing doctor, start playing detective in your business to understand what are the holes here. Because if you are plugging holes and you're standing there all day in your business like, no, don't move. That's not running a business.
100%.
That's not running a business. That's just managing tasks, right? You're a task manager. That's all you do, right? So imagine this. If you want to take the next steps and level up, plugging holes all day long is not how you're going to do that. It's literally illogical to think that you can do that. It's running your engine at 8,000 RPMs and expecting that you can just keep driving across the country doing that. We would expect nothing else in our lives, cars, whatever, like whatever metaphor you want to utilize, to operate at that kind of level, right? And still continue to function.
Yeah.
But we do that to ourselves.
Yeah.
So you need to start treating yourself like you treat anything else, right? Like you treat your own. And that was a big step for me is, dude, I wouldn't even ask my employees to do the stuff that I'm expecting myself to do, right?
100%.
So start treating yourself in that manner and give yourself the permission to step away, as scary as that might feel, because you're going to reclaim objectivity,
Yeah.
you're able to see what's going wrong, and so on and so forth, like I mentioned.
I love that. So like building white space, being intentional about giving yourself the margin
Right.
to be strategic and think through what you're actually working on, what are the challenges and what are the solutions that
Yeah.
could be, just completely game changing for your brand. I think that's so important and really, really imperative and vital for any kind of entrepreneur doing anything.
To that point, Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people on the planet, everybody probably knows who that is, usually spends his entire morning just thinking. Mm-hmm. And people are like, oh, well, he's made it. He can do that. And then it's like, no. What you don't understand is he's been doing that his entire career. He makes very calculated decisions. 90% of Warren Buffett's investments are in 10 companies.
Which is crazy.
Because he's like, you know what? Rule number 1 is don't lose money. Rule number 2 is see rule number 1.
Yep.
So he makes very calculated decisions. It goes back to what I said before.
Yeah.
What is it that's going to move the needle most? Because if you take 10,000 little steps to get to this point, what if you can take one leap?
Yes.
Right?
100%.
And that's what he does is he's taking leaps while the rest of us are with all of our little steps.
Exactly.
And we don't even know where we're going. We're just all
100%.
over the place.
So it's up-leveling your mindset and thinking like a billionaire, right?
Yes.
So like I know we've talked about this before where very similar example, Tim Ferriss talks about spending weeks on end just taking walks and going outside and journaling to figure out what is that one piece of the puzzle, what's that one domino that he can hit that's going to make the biggest impact. And I feel like that's been such a game changer in my business, just taking a step back to just think about what the heck I need to do next and where are the opportunities in my company to grow instead of trying to do more on my own. Because I feel like that's the tendency that we have, right? Is like we put everything on our own shoulders and it can become extremely overwhelming.
Well, it's a new skill.
Yes,
And anything that's
it's
a new skill,
I love it.
It's not something you're just born with. Like, oh, I know how to run an organization. Like, it's not like what you were born with. So anything that's new is going to be met with some resistance because we're challenging the status quo. And anybody that is in line with the status quo, that's something that is challenging that, at first is going to be like,
yeah.
dude, all I know is I get on Instagram and I see people say hustle and grind, baby. So I'm
Right.
hustling and grinding. And little do most of those people know is that those people haven't leveled up to where you want to be.
Yeah.
Right? So
I love that.
there's a lot of noise out there. It's really hard to listen to. But if you talk to really mature entrepreneurs that have actually done things that are worth listening to and worth mentioning, that is not the way they operate. And that came as a huge surprise to none other than myself. Because you talk about resistance. Ain't nobody in the world resisted what I'm saying right now more than the guy that's saying it.
And I can attest to that. You guys have no idea how long it took.
It took burnout for me to recognize that. And my entire mantra of my message now is hopefully helping people not make the mistakes that I made,
100%.
right? And not doing that. And I hate that. I always was like, I don't want that to be my thing. I don't want to teach people through my failure. But you know what? At the end of the day, failure is all about perception, right? It's never failure if you learn from it, which I obviously have, right? And now I'm able to give back to other people, right?
Yep.
So it's part of the process. As an entrepreneur, you're going to fail way more than you succeed, right?
Yeah,
so it's just
100%.
part of the process, part of that game. So if you're in that place right now where it's like, I don't know, man, I feel like there's no way I could do that, like, you're going to get to a point where this doesn't work anymore. What you're doing, this whole taskmaster, like you're going to have to divorce that taskmaster. And it might require you to fall on your face a little bit. Like it's part of the process. You're going to learn and grow from it. So I get the resistance. Hopefully you learn to adopt some of these new things and learn more about it. But if not, I promise you, you're going to come back around and eventually be like, you know what? I got to give this a shot. So it's when you're ready for it, right? It's when you're ready to start adopting a new philosophy, a new approach.
I love that. So we've unpacked a lot
Yes.
in this very short amount of time. So guys, I hope at home you're taking notes, you're ready to implement, to really take a step back and listen to your own wisdom, to analyze and go through the process, right, of auditing your own workflow and figuring out where are those levers that you could be pulling and how you can be working smarter. But Chris, you've developed an amazing new program that teaches entrepreneurs exactly how to get unstuck, how to get over burnout, how to be more calculated, how to leverage, right, their workflows and be intentional and strategic about what they do and how they do it. So I wanted to definitely talk a little bit about that as we wrap up, and then also talk about where people can find more about you.
Yeah, so the program that you're referencing, which is amazing, I'm really excited about it because we call it the Unstuck Formula.
And I've gone through it, guys. Amazing.
And it's a lot of what we talked about today, but it's really like practically how to apply that. And one of the things that we didn't get to that I know you kind of were like, okay, well, how do you protect yourself?
Right.
Like, I'm a type A, very driven person. And so I'm wearing, I don't know if you can see, but I'm wearing all these crazy devices, which I'm not insinuating that you have to do.
I'm too. I actually took mine off for the video. It's literally right here.
But for type A's, there's a lot of different things that I've learned that this is literally going to tell me, hey man, your stress levels are too high, right? And so here's the thing, and Ariana Huffington talks about this in Thrive, which is a tremendous book. We read it in my book club. But basically, she says, look, your phones, you don't go anywhere. You got chargers at the office, you got charger in your car, you got charger in your back pocket, you got a charger next to your bed, you got a charger, wherever, like next to your TV. But what do we do about this? Like, what are we doing to be intentional about charging this, right? I know that sounds like so like woo-woo, like kumbaya. Like, that's not what we're saying, but...
No, but like when you logically think about it, refueling has to be a normal part of running your engine.
Right. So here's the thing. I talked about you wouldn't expect your engine to run at 8,000 RPMs.
Right.
This tells you when you run at 8,000 RPMs for too long.
It does.
Right? It really is a good tool. This one measures sleep. So I go a next layer. Honestly, this one is very intuitive, very good device. And we talk about more of that in the program about how to use it, how to glean information from it, and stuff like that. But anyway, so the Unstuck Formula is basically a lot of what we talked about today. And it's really about, and this is the scary part, and what I realize is like those little subtle things that you don't notice that are keeping you stuck, right? And it just helps. And this is where it's tough for me because as a coach, right, and working with my clients, I can help them recognize those things.
Sure. And
I had one of my students when I like put up the Unstuck Formula, like he messaged me and he's like, I'm not stuck or burned out. I'm like, yeah, bro,
because you're working with me.
Like, that's my job. Like, if you were, we'd have a problem here.
Right.
So with any course, it's like, look, how can I take this knowledge that I've learned through this experience and kind of give that to everybody else? So it's extremely actionable, 5-module course, hours and hours and hours. We throw in a lot of health stuff. Again, it's a nice like symbiotic relationship between entrepreneurship, but also with health and burnout, and kind of creating that platform for growth on both fronts, which I feel like is really, when I went through burnout, it was really difficult to find that. It was like, okay, here's this medical thing talking about burnout, but it has nothing to do with entrepreneurs. Like, I have a guaranteed paycheck. Like, I can just hang out and like chill, but what if I'm an entrepreneur and that's not the case?
Right.
It's completely different.
Totally.
So we've tried to kind of merge and blend those two things together. So
I love that.
So for your audience specifically, we created a special promo link. So if you go to chrismichaelharris.com/KimTV, you can actually check out that offer and you get an awesome discount on it right now.
And by the way, guys, it's like ridiculously accessible.
Yeah.
It blows my mind that you're even offering it at that price point. So thank you for doing that for our audience. It's incredible.
Yeah, and in terms of where to find me, so on all social media, I'm at HeyCMH. So pretty easy.
Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Yes.
You just launched it and it's so good, you guys.
My YouTube channel is brand new and we just got over 100, which was kind of like, all right, I don't look like a newbie anymore. Like, I have at least 100 people, so that's good. The podcast has been around for 4 years. Like Kim mentioned, we've had some,
amazing guests.
Honestly, I look at guests that we've had and I'm like, how did that happen? So it was really been a true blessing that we've had the people we've had on the show. And I personally think, I always say this, but I'm an entrepreneur with a podcast. I'm not a podcaster.
Yes.
And I feel like that's a tremendous difference where there's so many podcasts. I think it's like 700,000 podcasts that are out there. Like, who to listen to?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm the only answer because I'm certainly not. But I think given that my business experiences, it certainly helps and creates more meaningful conversations with the guests that I do have versus just the typical rinse and repeat questions that you hear a lot of podcasters ask some of these guests like the Damons, Maries, Barbara's, Guy Kawasaki's, Dave Asprey's, so on and so forth. So a lot of really cool stuff going there. So Entrepreneur Hour is the podcast. Entrepreneur Hour TV is the YouTube channel, or you can go to chrismichaelharris.com/listen or chrismichaelharris.com/watch to check those out.
Don't worry. It'll be all linked in the description box below. Chris, thank you so much for coming on here, talking about a topic that our audience has been asking about and been truly curious for over a year now. So glad that you came in here, drop some amazing knowledge, and just here to support our community. So I love and appreciate you.
Yes.
Thanks for coming on.
And thank you for having me. This has been a real treat.
All right, guys. So again, if you have not subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And of course, give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video content in this episode. Go follow Chris, and we will see you in the next one. Love you. Thank you for watching. Un beso. Ciao.